What if I told you that one of Africa's most overlooked and economically challenged nations just paid off nearly $5 billion in debt without a single dollar from the IMF, the World Bank, or any Western lender? Sounds impossible, doesn't it? And yet, that's exactly what Burkina Faso has done. This landlocked nation, often dismissed as too poor to stand alone, has just rewritten the rules of modern economics. With unwavering resolution and bold leadership under President Ibrahim Traoré, this West African country has taken its destiny into its own hands and shattered the myth that Africa must always depend on Western aid to survive. This isn't just a financial success story, it's a political revolution. It's a statement to the world that a new Africa is rising, strong, sovereign, and unafraid. In early 2024, the world heard something it never expected. Dr. Apollinaire Joachim Guillaume de Tambela, the Prime Minister of Burkina Faso, made a historic announcement. The country had fully repaid $4.79 billion in domestic debt. No external bailouts, no IMF rescue packages, no Western conditions or oversight. It was a stunning declaration that made the global financial community pause, not because the amount was the largest ever seen, but because of who did it and how. Burkina Faso, a country often described as one of the poorest in Africa, had just done what wealthier, more stable nations often fail to do: clear its national debt using only internal resources. There were no media pleas for foreign support, no GoFundMe diplomacy with Paris or Washington. Instead, there was quiet planning, deep resilience, and a belief that Burkina Faso could fund its own future on its own terms. This move was more than financial. It was political defiance. It sent a clear message to the international community. We are no longer playing by your rules. And perhaps even more shocking, it worked. Burkina Faso's decision to rely solely on domestic capital markets, at a time when the country was under sanctions and political pressure, has sparked what some call the beginning of Africa's financial reawakening. It wasn't just about paying the bills. It was about reclaiming control of money, dignity, and the national story itself. At first, the idea sounded risky. Burkina Faso was still facing security threats from insurgent groups, and its economy was considered fragile by global institutions. Most experts believed that investor flight was inevitable. But something remarkable happened. Not only did investors stay, they invested more. Why? Because the government didn't just ask for money. It showed fiscal discipline, transparency, and a clear vision for infrastructure development. For the first time in decades, the people saw leadership that wasn't beholden to foreign donors, but accountable to its own citizens. This shift created what economists might call a confidence surge, but what ordinary Burkinabé would call something far simpler: hope. Hope that their money wouldn't be swallowed by corruption. Hope that their investments would build roads, hospitals, and schools. Hope that Burkina Faso could rise on its own. While mobilizing local capital, the country still faced enormous challenges. The Sahel remained a hotbed of insurgent activity. Political uncertainty lingered after the 2022 military-led transition. Western media called the situation unstable, and foreign investors quietly stepped back. Under such circumstances, most nations would panic and reach for external help. But Traoré's government did the opposite. Through clear communication, strict fiscal accountability, and relentless engagement with domestic institutions, the leadership built something rare in moments of crisis: trust. Banks, pension funds, and national savings programs were encouraged to invest in government bonds. And they did. Why? Because the government was transparent about where the money would go and how it would be used. Even as international pressure mounted, investor confidence remained high. Local businesses reinvested not just in bonds, but also in infrastructure projects that would support their long-term success. This wasn't just policy, it was strategy, a quiet revolution in economic thinking. The government understood that for a domestic market to function in the face of conflict, it needed something more powerful than contracts or interest rates. It needed trust between the state and its people. In most African nations under siege, people withdraw their savings. But in Burkina Faso, people leaned in. They saw that the administration wasn't just fighting extremists in the north. It was fighting a deeper war against the mindset of dependency. And somehow, it was winning. Still, Burkina Faso's greatest challenge didn't come from within, but from those outside its borders who didn't want this model to succeed. When news broke that Burkina Faso had cleared nearly $5 billion in debt without IMF support, the reaction from the global financial order was not celebration, it was suspicion. Analysts scrambled to explain how a country they had written off as fragile could do what even middle-income nations struggled to achieve. The fear wasn't just about money, it was about losing control. If Burkina Faso could succeed using local capital without IMF loans or World Bank oversight, what message would that send to other African nations trapped under decades of debt? Sanctions, reduced aid packages, and diplomatic cold shoulders followed. Western commentators questioned the sustainability of Burkina Faso's strategy. Some accused the government of relying on hidden support from Russia or China. But none of those fears materialized. Instead, what emerged was a new conversation across Africa. From Mali to Niger, from Ghana to Ethiopia, people began asking, could we follow this path too? Burkina Faso had not just paid a debt, it had broken an unspoken rule. The impact was global. African youth celebrated Traoré as a financial liberator. Diaspora communities in the US, UK, and France organized discussions around alternative African development paths. Scholars hailed Burkina Faso's move as the first modern breakaway from neo-colonial economics. Even in Washington and Paris, think tanks began publishing reports with cautious titles like Burkina Faso's Debt Gamble and The Rise of Sovereign Financing in the Sahel. What they feared most wasn't that Traoré had turned to Russia or China, it was that he hadn't needed to. Burkina Faso was becoming a symbol of radical independence, not through ideology or weapons, but through numbers, policy, and courage. And then, in early 2025, came a shocking twist. The International Monetary Fund, the very institution that once demanded austerity and structural reforms, quietly approached Burkina Faso with a proposal, not of enforcement, but of cooperation. Why? Because the numbers told a story they could no longer ignore. Despite sanctions, Burkina Faso's GDP had stabilized, inflation dropped below 6%, and local currency usage had risen by 40% in rural regions. Agricultural programs were outperforming projections. Youth unemployment fell for the first time in a decade. Burkina Faso hadn't just survived outside the system, it had improved. When the IMF requested a meeting, President Traoré simply replied, "We will listen." That was not submission. It was strength. For the first time, the conversation was happening on African terms. Burkina Faso had turned from the colonized asking for permission to the independent being asked for advice. Today, Ibrahim Traoré is no longer just a national figure. He is a beacon of African self-determination. His leadership has become a rallying point for millions across the continent. The story of Burkina Faso is no longer just its own, it is Africa's story. A story of awakening, sovereignty, and dignity. Burkina Faso's journey from debt-ridden nation to financial trailblazer is proof of what happens when a country believes in itself. As President Traoré said, "We do not ask for permission to be free. We rise and claim our freedom,